Okay, folks, welcome to, I guess, what we're going to call News Trap for today. It is Friday, May 17th, 2024. David Parsons here. Welcome to the program. I am with my good friend Justin Rogers Cooper, who in many ways is on every News Trap episode, lurking in the background, providing links and information. But glad to have you in person on Zoom, Justin. Good to see you.
Thanks, dude. It's been enjoyable listening to those news traps. I like your kind of incensed, crazy, friendly surfer California outrage vibe. It's pretty
Yeah,
good.
dude. It's fucking capitalism's crazy, bro. Yeah.
It's entertaining.
All
And I
right. Well,
actually, it's nice to send you the links or whatever, or the shots, and then to hear you process them because I'm always it's a different way of taking in information than reading it.
yeah.
And it's kind of nice coverage. It's kind of you have a nice thing going there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad someone's enjoying it. I'm going to continue doing them. I like the sort of diary element of this, like sitting down every morning at a regular time to just sort of like look at the news stuff you sent. But one of the things that's a benefit of this as well is that Nostalgia Trap listeners and I guess News Trap listeners send me stuff that they're like, oh, this either corroborates or totally refutes whatever bullshit you're throwing out on the podcast. But someone sent me something that I wanted to actually share the screen and show it to you, Justin, because I don't know if you know this world at all of so-called everyday carry. My friend Sean here in Ventura sent me a little bit of this in reaction to a picture I posted on Instagram of the truck that says alpha male on the back of the truck with a lion. He was like, dude, that masculinity stuff really is intense. And here's an element of it. And this is EDC, it's called everyday carry. And it's like the world of like mainly men who are sort of like displaying almost like a charcuterie board online, sort of like all the things they carry every day. So that might range from like keys and pens and wallets and all this kind of leather fetish, but also like knives and guns. And a lot of it is in the evolution of that like prepper mentality that you and I have talked about a lot. But I wondered if you've seen EDC because this is a world that I didn't know at all.
Nope, never heard of it. But it tells me a couple things. One, I know a lot of women who carry mace and other stuff, especially while running in public places.
That's true.
And I knew people in Brooklyn and New Jersey who regularly do that. So I don't know if women are displaying as much as what you're showing me there.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the display element than the carry.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like this guy, I was like, one of these, I was watching a 20-minute video, and I'm like, this guy's talking about his chapstick and his keys. And I'm like, okay, then that's just like a makeup video or something else. You know what I mean? It's just content. It's just sort of like, here's the stuff I like.
Yeah, that's how I read it too. I mean,
yeah.
and I guess I would the self-defense aspect of it seems to be the most interesting part of it.
Yeah,
And
that's why I bring it up. And it's not to smear this world, but more just like a window into like, I don't know, content and how people think of themselves online. It's really the everyday carry world is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think the militarization of everyday life is a dynamic feature of 21st century United States, but it's always been present. I think it's the thing that we call the Deadwood culture. That
totally.
we live in a culture in which there's high levels of civil violence, and it's not going away. There's no strong political consensus within this form of government for kind of legislating or reconstituting in the constitutional sense a different kind of society. So we live in like a high risk society with relatively high levels of crime compared to other advanced rich democracies. Not necessarily high levels of crime that it's evenly distributed throughout the society. I think that's one of the ironies here is that I would love to see the data on the EDC or whatever you just called it. I would love to see who participates in it. Anyway,
yeah, I was thinking that too. One general conclusion you can draw is that people don't feel safe. They feel like they need to be like prepared for violence, and prepared not only for violence but for like the grid to go down. A lot of these like they're sharing like survival stuff. It's like matches, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, is this guy going camping? he looks like he's hanging out in his truck in the suburbs, you know? And so there's this sense of like, yeah, a little bit of a disconnect. But the other part of me is that, well, you know, people that are 30 years old in this country grew up in an era in which that civil violence you're talking about, the like spectacular acts of mass shootings, have taken place in suburban locales, in movie theaters, in smoothie shops. I mean, we can list every fucking suburban space that's been invaded by massive terroristic violence that we call mass shootings. So it makes sense that that generation of people would like have a prep kind of mentality in some way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't. I think the idea of prepping for the apocalypse has that moment has passed because the apocalypse already arrived. Like January 6th, everything else. We've seen episodes of political instability in the U.S. and continuous, although episodic, civil violence. But even with the active shooting you're describing, that's less than 1% of all mass shooting in the United States, the kind of
Right.
spectacular stuff. The everyday stuff is actually the problem. And, if you look at perceptions of urban violence and the commuter who might be commuting from the quote unquote safe suburbs, which, in some ways aren't so safe, into the unsafe city, which, may or may not be safe, those commutes, provide both the realm of fantasy, but also a kind of realm of reality. I mean, even when I was commuting the other day in Queens, I felt unsafe. There was like a dude by the subway, like a middle-aged drunk,
Mm,
kind of white guy who I think he was just day drinking and was just really really blitzed.
mm,
But he was saying some real confrontational stuff to me that I had to kind of shout at him to get him to. I was getting into the subway, but I had to kind of make it clear that I wasn't an easy target. And he was saying pretty confrontational things to me that he interpreted me walking to the subway as an aggressive attack on him.
mm.
And then you combine that with everything else that I won't go into it, but any number of
You and I could
um,
fill podcasts.
yeah,
Just you and me could fill podcasts with like subway horror stories, you know. And
but
yeah,
also New Jersey Transit, and also
yeah,
going around, just going around stores and everything. There are whack people everywhere. Now, I'm not
yeah,
justifying any of that, but what I am saying is, if even I can sort of who I'm skeptical of some of the crime panic stuff, the moral panic stuff, but even if I can go through my daily routine and semi routinely encounter situations where it's like, do I need to be prepared for self defense in a situation like
right,
this?
right.
If you have another person who experiences that, then you're going to develop a culture. And I guess the point that I'm making is, we live in a pretty insecure culture. I think everyone would admit that. And so, what kind of culture do you make out of that? And so there's something both understandable and tragic, and kind of a casual eye roll about the thing that you're suggesting.
Right.
Because the minute you put it on social media, it kind of becomes more performative than anything else. And
Yeah.
to me, that kind of deflates the balloon of fear. But that's just me. I'm a little bit
Yeah.
skeptical of social media performances,
Yeah, same.
including my own.
Well, yeah, here we're doing it, right?
Yep.
I wanted to talk about I love the Tesla stuff you send. Not just Elon Musk, but just Tesla as a corporation in general. And the direction of like EV and cars and all that tech, because it seems like it's a window into all the other stuff. Like it's a way to talk about AI. It's a way to talk about social media culture. It's a way to talk about China and the kind of global economic stuff that I know you want to get to. So, you know, the Tesla stuff is funny to me in part because it's connected to to masculinity online, honestly. Because Elon Musk, like, I don't know if you've seen this, Justin, but I read some of these Reddits and Tesla Reddits, unfortunately. The fanboys of Tesla, they're defending Musk's demand for a $54 billion compensation package because they say he's worth it. They agree with Musk's basic argument that he needs the money to think about Mars. And that's amazing to me because it tells you like how they're dismissing like all the structures of a corporation to just again like Henry Ford, right? It's just like Mark Zuckerberg, and I want to get to him today. But like the as much as like we lament the kind of like how dorky all these guys are, they really have a cult. Like they really have a cult of people who are like 100% accept that they are the most valuable part of uh, our world and making this stuff. I
Yeah,
hate
I
it.
mean,
I hate it. You know, I
yeah,
hate the Steve Jobs stuff. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is, I mean, right off the bat, the cult of personality that exists around the rich has been present from the 19th century forward. And the US society in particular has always had a love-hate relationship with guys like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Jay Gould, etc. And every era of US capitalism, but especially since the Civil War, especially since the kind of the dynamic of the economy shifted from agriculture and slavery to industrialism, manufacturing, and then what later became, Silicon Valley software, and what now is just called tech. Um, every single one of those shifts has been accompanied to varying degrees by a kind of fetishization of the billionaire, what used to be called the millionaire, by the tycoon, the titan, and in some ways that's what The Great Gatsby is about.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're fascinated by these figures, and if you doubt the investment in Elon Musk, you need only turn to the last 40 years of HBO to realize that everyone has
40
mystified.
years, 4 decades of HBO. How is that
Isn't
possible?
isn't that
Yeah.
that's relatively accurate, I think.
I think
But
well,
but
Sopranos starts in like late 90s. Yeah, it's close.
yeah,
Yeah.
so 25 years.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not just HBO though, let's be honest. Like this fascination predates HBO, but I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, prestige television on which the focus is like that Brian Cox character on Succession. People want to figure out the interiority of these alpha men, in part because there's some sort of archetypal fascination with these kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, these paradigmatic figures of capitalism. And so in a weird way, these guys personify the kind of the front edge of capitalism itself as a system, and people justify the system on the basis of these individuals. These individuals play incredibly important roles in a culture that reproduces capitalism, both not just as a system but as a culture.
Mm.
And so it is interesting to hear them justify it. I mean, as far as their arguments are concerned, it's irrelevant. These kind of people have some kind of cultural power, within the media sphere, or the blogosphere, or the social media sphere. But
Well, let's pop
um,
that let's pop that bubble a little bit. In part because you've sent me a few links and bits from articles about the EV industry and Tesla. It seems like the story is, and I'm just anecdotally around here, that there's just like a shitload of unsold Tesla vehicles everywhere, and they're like they've saturated like whatever bit of the market they were going to, and there's other competitors, and it seems like the thing you texted me this morning, Justin, is you basically said like the whole world is manufacturing electric cars that nobody wants. And there's like a tremendous imbalance there. And it actually reminds me of books you read about like lead ups to Great Depressions and things where they're like, yeah, they just started making fucking shoes that nobody needed and we don't know why. And then it led to like all these, I don't know, bubbles and crashes and things like that. But it seems like that's partly what's going on with electric vehicles. What's your take on that?
well, the EV thing was a misallocation of resources, but it didn't reach the bubble proportions, in part because usually when there's a bubble, the whole society participates, like tulip mania, back in the 17th century, or the housing crisis that we saw lead to the 2007, 2008 financial crash. Everybody was flipping houses. Everybody was taking out arm adjustable rate mortgages. Everybody was kind of had their foot somewhere near the pool. Whereas with electric vehicles, it's a weirder industry because electric vehicles are not actually on the front edge of capitalism. It's a kind of weird and in some ways unfortunate emphasis that Tesla has become such a center of private capital when the product that it's producing can't match its valuation. More on that in a second. If you looked at China, the interesting thing about China, who's now the world's leading electric vehicle producer, like you just mentioned this moment ago, they're just pumping out cheap electric cars in part because they need their economy to be working on something that's not real estate. And so they believe that electric vehicles, solar panels, and other sort of like green capital products are their kind of new productive force that's going to get them into a world in which the actual leading edge, the real front line of capital is AI. So circling back to Tesla, this is the reason why Elon Musk, in some ways, is fucking around with the supercharger system and firing everybody, but then kind of hedging his bets and being like, "Oh no, 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 we're still going to honor some of those contracts." He's flip flopping around on that, in part because Tesla can't stay at its current market valuation, the sum value of all of its stock. Its equity is actually irrational unless they are more than a car company. So you've seen him position those robots. I think it's called Optimus, who's like some sort of dog-looking humanoid robot figure
Yes.
that Musk wants to embed the AI in that machine and have it become like the solution to the labor shortage. And then the other side of it, the last thing to throw at you is Musk also believes that Tesla's valuation can only be justified if it's a software company, and so therefore, it's the computer part of the car that's valuable, not the car part of the car.
Right. Yeah.
And so the kind of turning the car into a robo taxi, both one that you could Uber your own as your own Uber fleet, but also the idea that robo taxis are going to come based on the investments he's made in Tesla's very specific and proprietary use of AI technology, which is I think it's like the camera as opposed to the lidar radar
Still
system.
doesn't work though. A lot of things you send me are about how like government regulators are like, dude, there's no way we can let this stuff out there. And like that's the thing, is like they're banking on, there's a lot being put into like this sort of like magical powers of AI right now, but a lot of what we see is like this shit doesn't work. And there is a growing body of people who are like not just academics, but people within the corporate world who are like, this stuff is not what it's going to, like, what people think it's going to be. It's not that amazing. And the self-driving stuff, I mean, they keep pulling back on the self-driving, honestly, it seems like.
A couple things in the self-driving that it's worth thinking about. One, the GM project, which I think was a partner project called Waymo, if I'm remembering right, collapsed. They fucked up on that and they burned through the money. Also, Apple had to quit making its electric car. They sunk at least $10 billion over a 10-year period into the car development and just bailed on it because it doesn't work for them either. The Tesla is the only company that's really still trying to pursue self-driving. Remember, for a while, Uber thought that was the justification for its own valuation. Uber has actually turned into a pretty profitable company this year, but not on the basis of AI.
I took an Uber just 2 days ago because I had to go get my car fixed. That's another story. But I rarely take an Uber around here, and I got in, and as soon as I got in, the dude would just start yelling at me about how I'm not gonna have a job in a week, bro. The AI is gonna take my job. Like I'm not gonna be able to drive anymore. And he was just basically saying that like tech developments have chased him out of every industry he's been in. Because he said I used to code, and now like AI does the coding, and now I'm like, and he had like a rap. But either way, I was telling him, dude, I don't know if that AI car is coming anytime soon, dude. You might be secure. Like the idea that like you still need human drivers behind this stuff, I think is the way it is.
If I were him, I wouldn't panic.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And let me throw you what I consider to be one of the best things I've read about that the self-driving stuff this year. And maybe then we can stay on the car and the AI stuff for a second. One of the things that came out of the journal maybe a few months ago was a kind of long take comparison about where we are with autonomous vehicles. And listen to this. Listen to this assertion. The barriers to rollout of autonomous vehicles, or AVs, are myriad. For example, they shift liability from the driver to the manufacturer of a vehicle or the operator of a robotaxi service. That's just one reason they can't be as good as human drivers, but in fact, must be much safer. So think about this from an insurance perspective.
Liability.
Yeah. So if Tesla has robotaxis and they start getting into accidents, there's the insurance is at the level of Tesla. The insurance is not at the level of me or you, who has to take out individual car insurance. So it's a much different capital.
That's something that it seems like they're going to want to figure out, because they did that with we've mentioned this before, the way Uber and these other sort of like gig economy companies have gotten out of liability as it is through the independent contractor thing. They're like, they don't work for us, they're not employees, because there's that idea that respondeat superior, it's called, the idea that like you're responsible for your agents in the world, and employers hate that because it means their employees are sort of they're going to be liable for the accidents their employees get in. So yeah, I would be surprised if it went that way because they're going to, in other words, the development I would expect would be for them to first legally find a way to still let the operators of autonomous vehicles, the human operators, be liable for the things that the accidents they get in. Because there's no way that Tesla and these other corporations are going to just accept all that liability.
Well, and at the same time, though, at least in purportedly democratic states, in which I might shift that to Republican states, and I mean that with the lowercase r, meaning a federalist system with 50 states, they have their work cut out for them. They're going to have to approach that stuff at the federal lobbying level unless they want that patchwork legislation at the level of the 50 states, because those 50 states are going to be like, you can't do that here, bro. And we've already seen that. And that's why some of the experiments in self-driving are concentrated in states like Arizona, is because the other states have laws already on the books that are like, you can't do that shit here. So
That's
on the
more Sunbelt shit, like all the way from the 70s. That's why tech grew in the West, is because it's like we can come out here and not be regulated and that sort of thing.
right.
The AI thing, I wanted to get to that because one of the, I think, screenshots that you sent maybe, I don't know, 10 days ago is still sticking with me. The idea that Texas is struggling with its water supply, right? Texas is in like a lot of Western states, and you sent some stuff, frightening stuff about Mexico City as well, that are approaching that day zero idea. The idea that there are towns in Texas and in other places in Arizona that are suspending development. They're not able to grow because there's no sustainable access to clean water. Texas did this sort of public-private project recently, which they finally like spent billions of dollars to get this like clean water project going, and 100% of the water is going to Meta's AI servers in Texas. And I'm like, that is just a mind-blowing fucking element of this. That like, I mean, it means that our future is determined by like AI companies that need a massive amount of water for their servers, and you can project that into like the future in which basically AI companies like Meta are like owning entire states and allocating the resources of all of South Dakota to cool their fucking servers. And it just seems really on a big scale, very, very stupid.
Yeah, and I think my memory of that was that they're vacuuming up and hoovering up all the water, but that the Texas thing was a clean energy project called like something North or something along those lines.
Energy. Yeah, energy,
Yeah,
not water. I'm sorry.
yeah. Well, it's both actually, and
Yeah.
we do need there is a water problem, and in fact, a lot of the server centers need to be located near reservoirs and other fresh water sources because of the cooling factor that you're mentioning. But the real the real flip side of that too is the fact that the clean power solutions that are being developed, like in places like Texas, are going to powering up these AI server farms. And on top of that, though, the thing that we've seen in states like Georgia, but also all across the United States and the world, is that these server farms just require massive amounts of electricity. And I believe I read that even by 2030, the amount of additional electricity that will be necessary to power global AI servers that are going to come online just in the next 5 years or so is equivalent to like a whole nother country like the size of Australia. That it's
I
a
just want
really
to underline this is so people can flip through cat videos on TikTok.
essentially yes, because if you ask the social media companies what these servers are doing, most of the new servers that are coming online are indeed to feed the AI computations, but the existing servers, which were already being built at a very rapid pace, and I have a nice nugget for you there. Those additional servers, or those existing servers, are mostly, yeah, they're there to actually uh, produce the computations, the storage, the memory, to facilitate social media, which is to say that all the stuff that we're doing online in a kind of public commercial way, most of what we do is social media. But if you think about it from like an enterprise to enterprise, which is to say business to business angle, a lot of the other computations that we don't see is just like, the private software that's running Wall Street, the private software that's running like tech companies out in California. A lot of that's proprietary, a lot of that's behind the scenes. Like there are whole companies that are doing, cloud services, and they need massive amounts of data computations, massive amounts of energy just to work their servers, because they're facing small and medium-sized businesses to conduct online operations, the kind of stuff you associate with Etsy and eBay, but also just like business to business transactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of flies in the face of decades of sort of tech propaganda, especially from like Silicon Valley, Apple, Facebook, that's sort of like this progressive vision that always seemed to have a kind of latent or explicit environmentalism to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like what the real effect of all of what Silicon Valley has developed in the last decades has been to just decimate and continue to like lock us into these grids that suck up so much of our resources. And it's like, I don't get the justification for it. In other words, like, have we lost the script in some way? Because I don't know, maybe we haven't, because on those Tesla like Reddits, the guys are like, "Oh, like you're criticizing Elon Musk. So sorry, we tried to make a car that could like run off of fossil fuels. So sorry that we tried to get off fossil fuels." And it's sort of like that's the justification. In other words, is like the car is an environmental act, and I'm like, really, dude? Like it
Yeah.
just seems like that's a lie.
Well, we've gone over a lot why that's a lie. And they're either making that argument in bad faith because they're basically paid to make that argument, or they're making that argument in good faith because they're a low intelligence human being. But those are the only two options available. And I don't even think we need to recite here why they're wrong.
Could be a bot, dude. We could be not even a human being. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and the thing is, we often despise the bot at the expense of the human. I'm beginning to think sometimes it's the reverse. Let me throw one thing out. I mean, I can't remember if we've shared this in a prior show, but this is something that I keep coming back to. This is from a couple months ago in the Financial Times. I've been saving this whole thread. But this to me is what has stuck in my head. And this is the quote. But data centers' voracious power needs are set to rocket as cloud storage facilities, crypto mining, and AI all add strain to grids. Microsoft alone is opening a new data center globally every 3 days.
Whoa.
I thought that's the thing just Microsoft is opening one of those. You've seen these server centers. They're like the size of an Amazon warehouse. They're opening one of those every 3 fucking days.
That sounds like the beginning of a dystopia movie where it has like the text on the screen. It's like the year is 2045. Microsoft is opening a new server center every 3 days. And you're just sort of like, what the fuck for? What are they doing?
Well, and my easy little my punch down is twofold here. Number one, in terms of that environmental narrative that you discussed, people are usually pretty sensitive to corporations that produce carbon emissions, and you can see that with the relatively successful divestment movement around fossil fuels. Okay, and that was the divestment movement that, in some ways, was actually the successful model for what we're currently seeing on campus around Israel. Okay,
right.
Well, the
and
social
certain celebrities do get canceled for using private jets too much.
Right. Remember the kind of Taylor Swift plane tracker and all that kind of stuff. Okay,
Yes.
So now flip over here. Using Instagram, using TikTok, etc., is a participation in probably what is now the second most carbon intensive industry, with some of the most carbon intensive corporations on the planet, all of which might be telling you something like, we're going green and we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 3050. But whatever they're saying, it's certainly not the case now. And there's no social movement around it, because in some ways, making it viral on social media is too much of an obvious contradiction.
Yes.
But you will also remember that people were rightfully, and probably in most cases, rightfully shitting on crypto mining around the height of the pandemic when everyone was in lockdown buying crypto. Don't ask me about that personally. And if you go back to that moment, there was tons of memes being like, Bitcoin killed this many trees by dumping this much carbon in the atmosphere. Well, we have an industry right now that's as bad as Bitcoin, And it's the one sustaining the meme factory. It's the stuff that you're circulating
I
on
kind of give
social
that
media.
up. Yeah.
And so there's a contradiction culturally in terms of the environmental movement, at least the online environmental movement. And the other thing I'd point to there is at that same time that we were seeing divestment from fossil fuel companies with Bill McKibben's, I think, 360 movement,
Oh yeah.
and other kind of global environmental popular figures who I can't remember now, but there was a lot of attention drawn to the fossil fuel industry. Well, the tech companies are now, or should be, clustered really, really close to the fossil fuel companies, and there's not a peep around the tech companies. That's really interesting. And as we say with
No
contradictions,
blood for oil, baby.
yeah, it's either going to resolve in
No
one
blood for
direction or another.
TikTok. No blood for TikTok. How about that?
And okay, so the other side of the green capital investment too.
Well, yeah, I wanted to just interrupt you really
Sure.
quickly because
Yeah. Thank you.
it's sort of like this. People aren't going to give up their TikTok because it hurts the planet, but our way of life, our whole way of life, hurts the planet, right? Like we all know that. Like it's killing the planet. Like that. At this point, we don't need another fucking Al Gore documentary to tell us the inconvenient truth that our way of life kills the planet, right? It's a well-known thing. It's actually part of the doomer generation that's sort of like, oh, I'm not even having kids because climate change is just going to ruin the world. And yet at the same time, that maybe I mean there's like a doubling down in all the shit that like is producing it. Yeah, you give up your phone for the planet? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's kind of like telling me like not to have a car, or not to like do anything that hurts the planet because like we live as modern industrial people and that's that. It seems like that decision has been made. It's over.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, it goes back to what you said a couple weeks ago about no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Right.
But it is interesting that people still pick their issues. You know what I mean? And people still decide that certain things are worth fighting for within the paradigm.
Mainly to judge other people, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, now we're
That's
getting
like
to
me.
some
Yeah.
real inconvenient truth.
Right. That's
You
kind of
know,
like, oh, you still drive a fossil fuel burning vehicle. It's the idea that like, yeah, your decisions do matter. I don't know that I guess I'm pointing out that contradiction, that tension is important in part because I know you're going to talk about the green capitalism part of this because as much as it's like sort of like a done deal, we're not giving this shit up and we're like we've crossed over the fucking omega point of like warming and all that shit. There's still like nations are reacting to climate change and this like green capitalism is a sort of direction that national economies are going, right?
well, and in the form of billions and billions and billions of dollars of subsidies. Yeah. I mean, the thing that was the most easily predictable thing about how we would finance climate change has come to pass. State capitals are going to subsidize private investment, and we're going to socialize the investment in green technology and privatize the profits. And that's not just happening in the United States. Increasingly, that's the direction for Europe, and that's also the direction for communist China. So, I mean, that's what everyone's doing. That's what's going to happen forward. The thing I actually want
Can
to
you
point
explain
out,
what that means? I think that's a really important point there again.
well, it just means that, well, there's two sides to what I just said. The
Like,
first
how are
one
they?
is
They're socializing. I mean, it makes sense because it seems like it's in line with how I feel about
as
or think about capitalism is socialize the fucking liability. It's part of what we're talking about with Tesla, and
well, it's
then
actually
privatize the profits.
yeah, and it's actually socialized the investment. So, like as Andrew often reminds us about housing stuff with 421A in New York City and everything, a subsidy or a tax relief is effectively a financial grant. It's giving the money. It's not. They try to trick you by saying they're just not going to pay this much money in taxes or whatever, but in fact, it's a donation to a private entity. So like the New York City taxpayers and everyone else who works in New York, even if they don't live there, has been subsidizing New York City real estate companies for several decades under the guise that those companies will will build a certain amount of affordable housing. But that's just a gift. It's like building a stadium with taxpayer money, which is not a popular activity, by the way. But that's what we're essentially doing with the new Intel factory that's in Columbus, Ohio, or the new TMSC, if I'm Taiwan Manufacturing Company, the new facility that's being built in Arizona. We are actually the United States is building tons of these kind of green energy projects all around the United States. Ironically, they're mostly concentrated in red states. And Biden has put a lot of that through with what he called at the time the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a
Right.
curiously and very politically motivated name for that
You would
particular
describe
bill.
all of this as state capitalism.
Yeah, because it means that the state is the leading edge of investment, and that's what's making the entry point for private capital to be profitable. Private capital doesn't want to take $5 or $10 billion that could otherwise be put back to shareholders or otherwise invested in something that would become profitable 3 months from now. They don't want to take their cash flow, which in some cases they don't have that much. They're not sitting on billions. Apple's the exception. They're not sitting on billions of dollars to just say, hey, by the way, our entire cash flow is 20 billion. Let's just take it and let's build a bunch of factories that won't come online for 5 years. And let's use our money like that, because then you're not prepared for the next recession. You're not prepared to you can't solve the problems that you're currently faced with. So the state comes in, same thing that they've done with past industries, including the internet, including a lot of weapons technology. Everybody knows the Cold War story. The state comes in and says, we're going to pave the road with the research and the capital investments, the infrastructure. We're going to build all this shit so that we'll just hand it over to you so you can kind of come in, take it up, and ostensibly create a lot of jobs, but also get this new manufacturing humming. And the irony is, there's so many ironies. One of the ironies is this is the shit that Michael Moore and Donald Trump have been asking for since the fucking 1980s. This is the state coming in and socializing jobs, socializing manufacturing, and bringing jobs that otherwise would have gone to low wage countries in East Asia. And they're taking those things and saying, they're going to open those jobs here. We're actually bringing Asian companies to North America. I mean, just think about the historical craziness of that.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to build shit here. And the jobs are going to be, for the most part, union. The construction jobs are going to come here. It's going to build a tax base for cities like Columbus and cities in Arizona, yada, yada, yada.
And what are they building? They're building tech stuff like chips and things like that, right?
Yeah, chips. I mean, it's all kinds of shit. But at least in the case of Arizona and Ohio, it's the advanced AI chips. And the other thing that I want to throw down there is, they cannot build the green energy solutions like that one in Texas. They can't build that shit fast enough, and the infrastructure is not there to get the grid going. So, as we might have said before, it's the fossil fuel utilities that are toasting each other, having expensive conferences. They're going out to steak dinners on the weekends, being like, baby, it's never been a better time to be an oil company.
Yeah.
It's never been and also it's no coincidence that all the oil company stock and drilling has dramatically increased under Biden, because all these things require huge fucking investments in energy, and the green energy is not going to solve the issue. It's not there yet. So natural gas is the main beneficiary of all this. Let me just throw you one thing here.
Oh, crazy, dude. I mean, it's like we're moving forward with a tech revolution that's going to be fueled entirely by the old fuel, like oil. Like we're still talking about like the Rupert stuff. You know what I mean? Like the fact that oil is king.
Oil is king. And
until we get the alien energy source, dude, I don't know what powers all of this stuff. And to me, it's so important because it means that like so many of our resources are going to this, that it explains a lot of the sort of like, I don't know, the detriment in the other areas.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way to position the conversation, because no matter what else you are thinking, the investment from the state, which is a exceptional thing. It's kind of like the COVID level supports when people got checks in the mail, when all of a sudden Social Security and social spending suddenly became this magical priority. And notice, I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but there's no media that routinely looks back and says, by the way, remember when the government paid your rent? Remember when government paid employees? Remember when government did all that shit? One of the reasons why the media avoids it, and politicians avoid it too, is because they paid for all of it with massive amounts of debt. So Trump and Biden combined essentially, I don't know the exact number, but essentially, thematically doubled the national debt. All that spending, the checks in the mail, was borrowed from rich people at increasingly high interest rates. And
Mm.
so without going too far into the debt thing right now, the important thing to know is the state can declare an emergency, as we all know, and all of a sudden do whatever the fuck it wants in the middle of that emergency, like during the crisis. And in some ways, right now, that's the crisis. The thing I would point out, this is a political irony for the president. They built all this infrastructure through the infrastructure bill that no one even knows where the bridges are and where the roads are. But they've been spending that $1 trillion infrastructure bill, the one AOC voted against.
That's right.
They've been spending that money. There are bridges going up all around New York City. I pass them on the train every day. They're spending money like crazy from that infrastructure bill. And in terms of the Intel in Ohio, or even the Intel in Texas, the data centers, the green stuff in Arizona, blah, 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 blah. They're spending mad amounts of money. And it's ironic because, one, there's this assumption that these new industries are going to be profitable. And it's probably more likely than not that they will be, but it's still yet to be determined because, as we know, AI isn't actually it's not profitable yet. They haven't found the business model for, especially to justify the tens of billions they're spending. That's number one. So in other words, what is the long-term productive value of the state's investment? That's unclear. They're making the investment on the basis of ideology. That's why Republicans are like, you saw what happened to the solar panel industry under Obama. The state was subsidizing solar panels and all the companies went bankrupt because there's no actual market. You're seeing that with electric vehicles now. Companies like Tesla, but also the companies that are straight bankrupt or about to get there, like Rivian, all these electric vehicle fleets, they're not finding the market. So then, in other words, it's one thing if a private investor loses all of their investment in a car company because the market didn't materialize. It's another thing when the government spends taxpayer dollars to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and on top of that is paying for it with debt. The debt is liable to the taxpayer. We have to pay for all these fucking Intel factories that are being built, whether or not those fucking factories work. We have to pay for it in the next 10, 15 years. It's going to come out of our paychecks. So it better in some ways materialize in a productive way. But here's the political irony that I keep forgetting to circle back to. The political irony is, if you were going to spend $1.7 trillion of public money that's being taxed at 6 to 8% interest, which is what the treasuries are going for now, and that's why the investors are buying treasuries. They're like, damn, dude, interest rates are so high. We're going to clean up at 6, 7, 8% interest off all this treasury debt. Biden and Trump just issuing it hundreds of billions of dollars every quarter that's payable back at those huge rates. The rich are feasting. The money markets are feasting. Now, if you're going to do that, you're going to spend 1.7 trillion. You sure as shit better buy enough votes to get reelected. And the thing about Biden is they spend all the money on student loan forgiveness in terms of the youth vote, and the youth fucking hate him. And the youth are all alienated.
Genocide Joe.
All those people who got their debt forgiven aren't going to vote. Now, if they had,
I think the perception, honestly, among the crowd, because I read those the angry crowd of younger people and like the socialist crowd, whatever. The perception is that Biden didn't do anything about student debt. Like if you bring it up, they're like, he didn't do anything. He didn't fucking. He could have forgiven all student loans, and instead he didn't. And like
it's incredibly ignorant. Actually, since the Supreme Court said you can't do all that other shit, they just issued all those executive orders piecemeal. They've forgiven hundreds of billions of student debt.
I'm not here to cheerlead Biden, but I will say that the public perception, you're right. They suck as messengers. I'll say that, because more people should know how much they. I mean, we've had significant student debt forgiven in our family, and it's been absolutely liberating. You don't hear our stories. You know what I mean? And like, I bring it up to people, and they just don't believe it, I guess, or it's just not out there.
Also, don't confuse me with a Biden supporter, but I also am you have to speak in facts. So you can't just speak in ignorance.
It's not viral.
Yeah, it's not viral. Now, but here's the thing. The sticky part of inflation, the reason why the Fed can't lower interest rates is because of two things, and you mentioned them recently. Number one, healthcare costs. But the biggest one is housing costs. If you take out how sticky rents are in owner equivalent rents, which is like how much houses cost, built into the Fed's model. If you take those out, the core inflation is 2%. It's where they want it to be. Services is the third one that's a little sticky, but that's still like 3-4%. Goods, grocery store shit, a little more volatile, but like TVs, desks, Wayfair, Home Depot type stuff, that shit's back down to the 2-3% level. It's totally under control. That kind of thing.
You're talking about inflation.
Inflation, yeah, and it's housing. So Powell can't lower interest rates and sort of juice housing markets, with lower mortgages, lower rates, et cetera. He can't juice anything because housing is so sticky. Now, why is housing so sticky? Housing's so sticky because there's no social support. There's no social support for rent. There's not enough legislation around affordable housing. All the stuff that Sam and Andrew would tell you, and the stuff that a liberal would tell you, which is they don't build enough housing. There's not enough of a market. Since 2008, the companies are trying to ensure profits by underbuilding so that they're always making a profit on the houses. Okay, and Andrew and Sam have better arguments than that, but taken holistically, the Fed, Biden could have come in and done laws, executive orders, etc., to change the housing market. If he had changed the housing market, you would have potentially lowered the actual inflation rate from where it is now 1 or 2 points lower. Powell would have already been lowering the interest rates, and everyone would have been taking a side. Now, there's two parts to the frustrated housing market. One is people who can't buy entry-level homes, young people especially, and people whose rent is too high. In an unequal system, the rent will always be too high. You can try to do some stuff like New York City has done, and the kind of stuff that Sam and Andrew talk about. I'm putting that aside for a second, and I'm just going to say that if you go back 20 years, the nation as a whole wasn't doing shit about affordable housing the way that we want to do it now, but there wasn't a housing movement because people
rent has always been the barrier to social mobility.
Right. But housing itself was cheaper relative to income in the 1990s.
Yes.
It was cheaper.
Yes.
You could buy entry level houses, and with a FHA loan or 10% down, whatever it's going to be, you could get into the property ladder. And the reason I'm making that argument is from an imperial perspective. You divide and conquer. And so if you could hive off the people that are just furious about not being able to purchase a home, if you could hive them off from the people who are just furious about rent, you could destabilize the coalitions that are moving politics towards affordable housing. Even if you could address both of those two groups simultaneously, you would have provided a different material foundation for understanding inflation. And by the way, if you could have lowered housing costs, all the other price increases wouldn't feel so fucked up. And the economy, with immigration right around it, the economy wouldn't be the thing that's pissing everybody off. So it was an enormous miscalculation by the Biden administration, even though they thought they were making the climate change people happy, and they thought they were making like the private capital AI people happy by throwing this Inflation Reduction Act through. Another irony is it was called the Inflation Reduction Act, but it isn't reducing inflation fast enough to get Biden reelected, because the Inflation Reduction Act should have contained measures towards reducing the costs of housing. So it's a big fucking irony. And the last irony I'll throw at you, David, is healthcare. That's the number two thing, as you mentioned on News Trap the other day. Obamacare didn't fucking work. It didn't lower healthcare costs. It didn't control the companies. It couldn't control private healthcare capital. And as a result, that also was causing inflation to be sticky, which means Biden is about to lose the election, mostly for economic reasons and also for immigration reasons, but mostly on economic reasons related to inflation. And the two things that are providing the steepest obstacle to overcoming the inflation crisis are things Democrats did, things the Democratic Party did over the last 15 years. So the party fucked itself. And they should have an honest conversation about that amongst themselves.
Yeah, I think that the Bernie Sanders wing of progressivism would take that as a banner. The party fucked itself, right? And their story is kind of like Michael Moore-ish, ironically, which is that the party fucked itself by walking away from a kind of working class union-based politics and moving towards whatever sort of neoliberal cultural hell we're in now, that we would call the Democratic Party. Someone I'm thinking of, like, there are many figures that represent that, but Obama is maybe the most towering one of them. But either way, yeah, that's the knot, and it is ironic and funny that they didn't, like, quote, buy the votes. And it's to me, that's a really important part of American politics, is recognizing that yeah, sometimes the president has to do some shit to, like, get certain economic meters running at a certain level so that he can activate the coalitions he needs to win these swing states. And, like, that's the game. And they fuck that up again, and they fuck it up again and again and again. The stuff you sent me about it, Biden bragging about, like, I've got an office in Philadelphia. Trump doesn't have an office in Philadelphia. Like,
he doesn't need it, bro.
Yeah.
They're not voting for you.
Right.
So there's no magical hidden voter that office is going to convert because it discovers them or gets them out to vote.
It's also people generally, as much as we talk about economic stuff here, like, people generally, like, assume that presidential elections turn on, like, all sorts of, like, vague cultural issues and, like, red state, blue state, gun rights stuff, and, like, all this kind of, like, weird shit that people pick. I mean, Israel, Gaza, right? I feel like is in there, in that, like, it'll affect the election, but people are thinking the entire election will turn on people thinking Joe Biden is Genocide Joe. And I just don't know if it seems like, and we've said it many times, it's the price of fucking eggs and shit. And it sounds like the price of rent that's going to be a much more determinant factor in the election. I guess we're not saying anything super obvious there, but yeah.
Well, it is. What's less obvious is that no one fucking talks about the Fed, but they do talk about migrants. So it's like, dude, shit's, and I don't even want to get into it. Okay, but a couple points.
Yeah, I know you got to go. Let's do our bullet points to wrap up here.
I want to circle back to something you said half an hour ago, which was the idea of the Uber driver thinking that the AI was going to take his job.
Right.
And I want to go back to something about, like, the topsy-turvy Black Mirror nature of all these AI investments and what they're really portending here. So a couple things. One is going back to that article that's trying to piece together the kind of where we are now with capital and tech. Listen to this. When you move people in cities, and again, the kind of vague topic here is autonomous vehicles, but that's wrapped up in AI. That's wrapped up in this. Okay. When you move people in cities, you can't afford to kill them. That's the crucial issue, said Heidi Weil, chief executive of autonomous vehicle company Venti Technologies. The other big obstacle is cost. The savings that were supposed to come from autonomous vehicles have been largely wiped out by the arrays of sensors, cameras, radar, and LIDAR, and the heavy-duty computers they have to carry on board to process all that data. Plus, there's the cost of mapping and remapping the areas these vehicles drive. Just want to pause there and note, it's cheaper to hire an Uber driver and to insure the Uber driver than to build the supercomputer and, like, supercar network that's necessary to invent the robotaxi fleet. Meaning, under currently operating capital models and energy models, the robotaxi fleet isn't profitable yet. So if you fucking say that Tesla's valuation comes from the fact that it's an AI autonomous driving company now,
yeah,
that's not profitable yet. So you're
right.
still
it's saying like we're going to replace labor with something that's far more expensive.
And that tells you something huge about where we are right now too, with a lot of stuff, that human beings are becoming cheaper than the AI that's supposed to replace them. Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
That you can't replace labor with an autonomous robotic slave that's more expensive than the person.
Right.
So that is part of the whole conversation around declining birth and immigration that we're kind of having this year. And let me throw out one more thing for you here too. What all three of these technologies, the metaverse,
remember the metaverse?
Yeah. Metaverse,
yeah.
The metaverse, blockchain.
Remember blockchain?
Yeah. And AVs, autonomous vehicles, have in common, says commoners of Anderson Horowitz, is that they're all, quote, general purpose, end quote, technologies that must fit in with all kinds of other things, including laws, infrastructure, and people's expectation. and changing everything about a society, from how it regulates crypto and whether people are comfortable doing their work in VR, to laws over who is liable in the event of an autonomous vehicle crash, may take a lot longer than the billions already invested in these technologies can last.
Wow.
Oh,
That's
man.
good. Yeah.
Savage take. And that's the reason why I like reading the Wall Street Journal is they have these very honest business people come in. I mean, Anderson Horowitz is like the leading venture capital fund of Silicon Valley, et cetera. And they just provide these acid takes where they're like, well, actually, from a business perspective, this is all bullshit. And it's like you have these idiots on the social media that you've been quoting being like, actually, Elon Musk is a superstar innovator. And you have the highest ranking, most celebrated venture capitalists being like, no, y'all are stupid as fuck.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth underlining a little bit right now.
It is, and the other part of it that I think is the disturbing element for me, that, and it's part of, and I don't mean to like, concentrate on people on social media, but I think they're important in part because they reflect a kind of id of like what's beneath this. You know what I mean?
Point.
And
Good point.
And like so much, and that so much of the tech bro mentality is like an erasure of the human, even to the point of like, well, Elon Musk is Tesla. I mean, he doesn't make the fucking cars. You know what I mean? Like millions of people work, or I guess thousands, fewer than before, work there making the cars. But either way, it's there. There's this sense, and I brought it up to you, and this will be my last point. There are these true crime podcasts that are beginning to be produced that are just sort of like they're basically produced by AI bots that find the information of the true crime on Wikipedia and then host a show in the style of like a true crime podcast with like a compelling AI voice. And there was like this thread on Reddit where people were like, what do we think of this? Are we okay with the AI voices? And there seemed to be a consensus of people who were like, the AI voice is actually better than the human voice because you don't have to hear all the like mess ups and everything and all the like messy stuff. And I was like, that's a porno mentality. You know what I mean? Like a sex bot mentality where it's like, I can just, the bot is actually fucking a sex bot is actually better than fucking a human being because you don't have to like smell anything. You don't have to deal with like them talking at all. They just like do it the way you want to. And that's that. In other words, there's a like desire to like cut out the excess of what the human is and create some like perfection. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but it's like the tech people. And that's why I think of them as sort of like this sort of like kind of like satanic urge bubbling through the human experiment, is this notion of like, we can just make it better. And it's just like, is it better though to have a robot do it? And I think what you've just pointed out about like the robots being more valuable than the human, it's stuff for the future. It's
more
great.
Expensive.
Right.
The human is actually the better value.
That's right. Yeah. It's great news trap stuff, dude. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, no problem. And thinking of Lawyers in the Attic, which I'm enjoying. Let me just leave you. My final comment is just one sentence for you here, because if you think about the tens of billions invested in AI just this year, and I don't think I'm an optimist about it, but I don't think I'm that cynical. I think I'm actually just it's an acid realism. But listen to this. In a recent Stanford University study of responses generated by 3 AI models to 200,000 legal queries, researchers found that questions about random federal court cases resulted in pervasive errors. OpenAI's ChatGPT 3.5 fabricated responses 69% of the time, while Meta's Llama 2 model hit 88%. Hey, Llama 2, tell me about this federal court case. And it just shits out lies 88% of the time. You think that's a fucking good investment of private capital?
Right. And that's why Ron, the guy that I do the podcast with over at Lawyers in the Attic, that's why Ron laughed at me when I said AI is going to replace lawyers. He was like, lawyers are precise researchers. AI can't do that. It has not proven that it can do that. AI, all I've seen from AI is that it's basically just like Googling something. And it's like, yeah, even Googling things, you have to dig through piles of bullshit to get to stuff from Google. So yeah, don't get me started on AI, bro. Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
AI is not in my, I'll say this, I'll wrap it up and say, AI is not in my everyday carry. I'll see you next week. Keep sending those screenshots. We all love it.
All right. Appreciate you. Appreciate Patreon.
Later.